Citadel Securities LLC versus the SEC. That's right. The Securities and Exchange Commission was sued by Citadel Securities. This is case number 20-1424, and it's in the U.S. Court of Appeals, which is going to be important in just a little bit. So if you want to know what the hubbub about this is all about, I highly implore you to look at this write-up by Dave Lauer. Obviously, I look up to him. I've had the privilege to interview him 3 times, and I very much respect everything he has to say. He is a wealth of knowledge. I will link it to the video below. This Reddit link, he's writing up basically what's going on, and I'll give you the kind of the high level view, but there's, as you can see, a lot of information in here, but let me do my best to explain what's going on. But if you want more detail, once again, check out Dave Lauer's post entitled Citadel's Lawsuit Against the SEC Over IEX's Delimit Order Type. So here's what happened. IEX is a lit exchange. It was created in 2012, later became an NSE, a National Security Exchange, in 2016. In 2012, you had this group of people, I believe working at RBC, who noticed that whenever they put in an order, they got a worse fill. They saw the price, but whatever it was a little bit higher. And this group of smarty pants people were like, that's really weird. And this eventually became the birth of IEX. IEX created an entire exchange to battle against latency arbitrage. The market many times is a bet of supply and demand. Is the company going to improve? Is the market going to like this company? What's the public's perception of a particular sector? But people around 2010-ish started to realize that they in no way had to carry risk of a situation of is their bet right or wrong. It was more so of because of technology and market structure, and I'm talking about like actual plumbing, like the hardware, they realized they could be faster, as in they could see orders coming in and front run. This is a very high level explanation of what's going on, but that's what these guys who eventually made IEX noticed is like whenever they made an order, they got a worse fill, and they're like, well, who knew it was coming in, and why were they able to like beat us to the punch and make a little bit of money? And that's like a high frequency trader. That's their model. That's their business model. Make a little bit of money on a lot of trades, and they end up being net profitable by like billions of dollars. It's absolutely crazy. So anyway, IEX noticed this and they set out to make it. And one of the key aspects of IEX was it's called like a speed bump. And this speed bump, whoever is engaging on IEX, there is a 350 at max microsecond delay. So 350 microseconds, just to give you an idea, this was actually said by a lawyer in the court case this morning, who was like standing up for IEX and explaining the case of IEX. She said, if you blink, that actually took 200 times longer than the speed bump that IEX imposes. So that's like, just to give you an idea of the speed, it's 1/200th of the time it took you to blink. That's the speed bump. But that little speed bump is enough to mess with all the high frequency traders, that it really helps prevent latency arbitrage where you're being front run by all these very fancy hardware machines and all these other high frequency traders and all their other tactics that they have. So that's a little bit of a background. And from there, they've tried to stand up for market participants even more as an IEX by creating this delimit order. So this delimit stands for discretionary limit. And once again, it's all in this write-up. Just read it over. But the highest level view is IEX, they see your order. You put in a delimit order, and let's say you try to buy stock XYZ and you put in an order at $10. Well, using a very similar model that all these other high frequency traders do, they use this model to see if it's about to change. And the way high frequency traders do it, like, oh, it's about to change, we could front run you. What IEX essentially does is they change your order and they're like, no, you can actually get a fill at $9.99. So it's beneficial to use it because you're getting a better fill because they're about to be predictive of like some huge order going on. They're like, hang on, this might sway the market. Or they see a bunch of change on various other venues, like such as other lit exchanges, the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ. They see that a change is incoming, and this delimit order, it allows them the ability to quickly change your order to help you get a better fill. That's the high level view of what you need to know going on. This delimit order was first presented in 2018. They took it to the SEC, IEX, and they said, hey, we want to let this go to the world. And this was like about time 1 million that Citadel got involved, and they said, nope. In fact, Citadel tried to stop IEX from becoming a lit exchange, but that's a whole different story. The history of these guys is Citadel just always continually suing IEX, and this time they happen to be suing the SEC about an IEX market type. But anyway, I digress. 2018, it gets presented, and the SEC was hearing the case on why it should or shouldn't be allowed, and Citadel did everything in its power to drag it out for an entire year, and it finally went into action in October of 2020. Excuse me. So it was presented in 2019. It was in the court cases for a year, got approved, and it was October of last year. It's been running for a year. It's like actively live right now on IEX. But when they heard it out, like obviously Citadel a year ago lost that case, and it kind of a question of why. Like if you're presenting this, that doesn't really make sense, because IEX is presenting it as, hey, it's better. It helps battle high frequency traders and latency arbitrage. And Citadel has like some convoluted argument that it's not. And the SEC obviously didn't agree with them. And that's why they approved it. And that's why it's been running for a year. So fast forward till right now, what is going on in the court case that started this morning? And just so you know, it continues tomorrow. We'll be listening to it once again. They are now suing the SEC, saying that they did not properly understand the quote unquote harm that delimit would present to people. And now the U.S. Court of Appeals has to hear this case. Like, to my understanding, U.S. Court of Appeals, to my understanding, this is one step below like the Supreme Court. They have, I guess, really jacked this level up. And I find this so interesting. This is new to me. And I was researching this over break, and I'm going to get into this in more detail, but they already lost the case to the people who know about the markets. Like, they lost the case to the SEC. IEX prevailed, which is interesting. So now this almost seems like a last ditch effort to be like, well, let's bring the case in front of people who are not necessarily experts. Like, if you listen to the cases today, this was case 3. The two cases before it, one involved a sawed-off shotgun, and the other one involved like an actuary and some sort of insurance payout. This is not a group of people, these judges, who necessarily have market expertise. But with that being said, if I listen to this now, once again, the judges were impressive. They were highly informed and they asked great questions. But to me, it seems like a last ditch effort, like a flailing attempt for Citadel to try to stop IEX and what they're doing for the markets. So it is, I don't know, it was a good 30, 45 minute listen. It's up there. It's on YouTube. You guys can all listen to it. I had it on the stream all morning. But I wanted to talk about 3 key takeaways that I had from day one, round 1 of the fight of Citadel Securities versus SEC. The number 1 takeaway was that the lawyer for Citadel Securities, and if you listen to it, you can almost tell that he messed up. He sounded awkward, and he tried to take it back, and it was like kind of an off the cuff, like, oh, we have you. And then awkwardly later, he realized he said something he shouldn't have said. He basically said, at first, this is right at the beginning, and it's so interesting. He said, the SEC was saying, are you arguing that latency arbitrage is a thing that does not exist? He's like, no, like maybe it was a thing a decade ago. And right there, maybe it was a thing a decade ago. That in itself is crazy interesting, because if you read the book that's all about IEX and it's called Flash Boys. It's a great read. I ripped through it in 2 or 3 days. It's very fascinating about the start of IEX. In that book, I don't even know what chapter it was. I was trying to find it, but I couldn't. They were talking about how at that moment in time in the early 2010s, how IEX and everyone that thought this about the latency arbitrage of people front running other people, they were treated like pariahs. They're like, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't happen. Fast forward an entire decade. A Citadel now is like, oh yeah, no, it was probably a thing. Like, that was a thing. Then when a decade before this, before this very moment, they were saying, no way, you're a crazy person. It doesn't happen at all. So I can't emphasize the importance of that enough. I've read that myself in the book, where they're like, we were meant to feel crazy that it was a thing. And now Citadel, once again, just admitting it was a thing, which is very similar to how Citadel is now highly supportive of payment for order flow. But in 2004, Citadel argued that payment for order flow is very harmful to the overall system. You see this pattern within Citadel where, given enough time, if they can figure out how to make profit on something, they will take a 180-degree spin of their overall opinion. So that was the first thing that I thought was very interesting from day one. They basically just admitted that they said, like, latency arbitrage is a thing, and now they're saying it's not a thing now, but that's what they said a decade ago, and now they're admitting that it was a thing a decade ago. So a little bit of confusion there on, I would say, their part. Number two, so all of this, the argument is about latency arbitrage. Is it fair that IEX can do the speed bump, which, like, they are trying to bring up? They're like, well, why weren't you against that originally? And they're like, well, we didn't know about it. And now they're arguing about, like, delimit, which that price improvement happens within that little speed bump that IEX has implemented to fight latency arbitrage. And now they're taking it this step further to actually improve your price if they see things going on. So for example, let's say this is, they even used this example, and they were purposely kind of sidestepping the truth a bit. They use the example of, let's say you're trying to buy 1,000, I guess, Apple. You go to the New York Stock Exchange, you buy 500, you go to the NASDAQ, you buy 400, and you have 100 left over just because that's where the liquidity is at, and you have to go get it filled on IEX. So what's interesting is, and this is why I'm saying that they're kind of sidestepping the truth of the situation, is they're like, oh, okay, well, what IEX's system does is they see that they're getting a fill everywhere else. They know that a change is incoming. So at that point, it can go both ways. So let's say it goes from 10 to 10:01. And that's, I guess, inherently true. But the scenario that they're creating to argue that, they're purposely trying to take advantage of people who have lack of a knowledge of the market. So these big players, whenever they do it, they intentionally account for time. They know based on what exchange they're going to, there are certain latencies, and any quote unquote smart player, what they do is they do all their orders simultaneously, taking into account the delay to get to a certain exchange. And once again, we are talking about microseconds, but it does matter because that's the word, like the world we're dealing in, faster than you can blink your eye. So any smart player knows that. They're like, if I want 1,000, they'll see where the liquidity is, and they'll do the proper delays so they get it all filled simultaneously. And their argument to these judges is like, well, if we do it naively, as in like we just throw it out and then basically you're going to get leftover like toxic fills. Maybe you've heard that from Dave Lauer in the past. I've also just recently heard the term as like, it's referred to as retail exhaust, like just the little extra ones at the end. It's toxic. No one wants those fills, and it ends up getting a worse fill. So all of this is what they try to present to the judge today, when that's why I'm saying they were trying to sidestep it. They came up with a counter example that no smart player would ever use, no big player would ever use, and they were intentionally trying to make IEX look bad. And then they took that one step farther as it all relates to this latency situation. And the judge brought up a very, very good point of Citadel Securities is inherently against any form of latency that IEX is showing to the market. They're acting like it takes a million years. And that's why he had some example. He's like, well, if I tell my kid to come down and I say immediately, I expect him to come down, but if he stops and reads his book, well, like, remember, we're talking way, way faster than you can blink your eye. That's the speeds we're really talking about. So to us, it makes no difference. It takes longer than it does for us to hit the enter key, but it protects us in the way that we're not getting front run by high frequency traders. And so they're always against this latency that protects us. And what's funny is their overall argument to the SEC, if I were to best like really summarize it, is it's harmful to us, Citadel Securities. We as Citadel Securities represent retail. So thus, if something's harmful to us, it's inherently harmful to retail. That's like legitimately their argument, is like, we don't like it. It's bad for us. We represent retail. Hence, all this methodology is bad for retail. That's the mental gymnastics that they go through. But what I found interesting, to wrap up part number 2 here, is, and you're allowed to do this, but if you go to any of these lit exchanges, you can pay for what's referred to as tiered access, as in a faster access to that exchange. Once again, the difference is in microseconds, but it's publicly available. You can get it for the New York Stock Exchange, to the NASDAQ, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on and on. So the judge brought up the fact, they're like, well, hang on. How are you arguing about IEX and this speed delay when you're here, one of the biggest, like, I guess, consumers of faster access? Like, IEX was trying to take the high horse of like, no, we should all be there fast at like the exact same time, and there should be none of these delays. And like, of course, they're trying to take the altruistic route, but it really doesn't make sense. And the judge kind of smacked it back in their face when they're like, wait, you pay for fast access, like this tiered access, which is a faster access to all of these exchanges. So it's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black. So I thought that was very interesting. And just so you guys know, there is tiered access. If you want, you could pay for a faster access, but it's really in the world of high frequency traders, because the people like us as retail, we're not going to get much of an advantage by shaving off like 100 microseconds. Anyway, number 3, and the final one that I thought was interesting from this is it's really coming back to what I was starting this off with, of just where it was. The U.S. Court of Appeals, I naively thought that this would be in front of a group of market experts who would be hearing out the case, not a quote unquote normal court case, who right before this heard something about a sawed off shotgun, heard something about an actuary insurance payment with another company, and then are hearing Citadel Securities versus the SEC. And my mindset here is like, okay, Citadel Securities already realized that they lost to people who knew about the market. They lost their case against IEX when they were talking to the SEC. So now they're trying to sue the SEC in front of the U.S. Court of Appeals, which is one level below the Supreme Court. And I think that they are banking on people who don't have this expertise. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for us, these judges seem to be, I guess, very well, informed about the current situation. But what I want to leave you with to really wrap all of this up is, you could almost, and this is what a lot of the people on the space call were talking about, and I just want to resonate it just in case you haven't heard it, because I think it's spot on. I think there's almost a decent argument that Citadel Securities is abusing our justice system. They're intentionally clogging up our justice system for something that they know they probably have a very small percentage chance of winning. Maybe they're paying people off, maybe they're not. I don't know. But our judges and our justice system has so much more important things to kind of like figure out and wade through. While Citadel Securities, they're continually to try to fight the same fight that they are losing and losing and losing. That's why it's in the Court of Appeals, because they've already lost it at least one time before, probably multiple times before. And I'm no legal professional, but you almost start to wonder, when does it get into the territory of just like clear abuse of our system, of like they're just pissing away taxpayer dollars. They're making an obfuscated argument that it hurts them and they represent retail, so it's hurting retail. And they're intentionally attempting to take advantage of people who don't have the expertise. But fortunately, it seems like the judges were well prepared and smacked it back in their face. But the entire thing, crazy. We don't know how long this case is going to last. Day 2 is tomorrow, October 26th. So it continues on Tuesday. We don't know how long it will continue at all. We have to wait to see how many arguments have to be made, yada, yada, yada. So I'll keep you updated on everything that like is playing out. But between Citadel Securities admitting latency arbitrage, basically trying to cover up that they use tiered access themselves, and now it just, like I said, gets into the area of like you're abusing the justice system, which I don't know. I don't see how it ends well for them, but we just have to kick back and kick our feet up and just kind of see how this particular narrative plays out. Now, like I said earlier, if you do want more details on the specifics of this case, I highly recommend you read this Reddit post by Mr. Dave Lauer himself.